There's something profoundly satisfying about having a space that's entirely your own, a sanctuary where every tool is neatly arranged, every project has its dedicated corner, and quiet moments remain undisturbed by outside interference. For Brock, that space was his meticulously maintained lawn and garage. For 15 years, his property had been a model of order and self-reliance in the heart of an upscale suburban neighborhood in Texas. Neighbors admired the healthy, well-mowed grass and the pristine white picket fences that bordered each home. Yet beneath that veneer of perfection lurked a power struggle that would soon engulf the community. It began on a morning like any other. Brock, a seasoned law enforcement officer known for his calm demeanor and unwavering principles, stepped out of his car in full uniform with an iced tea in hand. As he prepared for another day at the police station, he noticed something unusual under his windshield wiper, a bright green piece of paper that immediately set his nerves on edge. At first, he assumed it was just a stray takeout menu or some trivial piece of litter. But as he bent down to inspect it, his heart sank. The paper was an HOA violation notice, demanding a $79 fine for improper lawn maintenance. For Brock, whose lawn had remained consistently green, healthy, and expertly maintained over the past 15 years, the accusation was absurd. Standing there on his driveway, coffee in hand, he surveyed the immaculate lawn that had been his pride for so long. The grass was neither a perfect golf course nor ostentatiously manicured. It was simply neat, orderly, and cared for with genuine dedication. Yet, the notice suggested otherwise. It was the first sign of a brewing conflict, one that hinted at far more than petty fines. Not long after, the sound of high heels clicking on the sidewalk cut through the calm. Brock's eyes narrowed as he recognized the source. Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed enforcer of the neighborhood's rules, and the newly elected president of the local homeowners association. Karen had moved into the community 6 months earlier, and wasted no time climbing the ranks on the board. Known for her strict adherence to rules, no matter how trivial, she had quickly earned a reputation for doling out fines over the smallest infractions. Whether it was a mailbox painted a shade off the approved hue or a lawn that measured half an inch over the standard, Karen made sure every violation was noted. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," she said in a voice that was sugary sweet yet edged with unmistakable authority, as if every syllable carried a threat. Without any preamble, she continued, "I notice that your lawn exceeds the maximum allowed height as per Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA Guidelines. Your grass is approximately 3½ inches tall, well over the allowed 3 inches. Brock listened, his calm exterior belying the rising storm within him. He had always taken pride in his property. "My lawn has been maintained to a high standard for the past 15 years, he replied, evenly. "It meets all reasonable criteria." But Karen barely spared him a glance from her tablet as she continued, "The fine is $79, and if not paid within 72 hours, it doubles. Also, those garden gnomes of yours, cherished mementos I suppose, are not on the approved decoration list." Karen's words stung. The garden gnomes had been part of Brock's yard for over a decade, carefully collected by his late wife and maintained as a tribute to her memory. Yet, to Karen, they were relics of a bygone era that needed to be swept away in favor of a modern aesthetic. With a dismissive wave of her tablet, she turned on her heel and strode away, convinced that she was ushering the neighborhood into a new era where her strict rules reigned supreme. In the following days, as the sun rose and set over the well-ordered streets of the community, the tension escalated. Karen's relentless enforcement wasn't confined merely to Brock's property, it seeped into every corner of the neighborhood. Sarah Thompson, an ER nurse who lived 3 houses down, had received multiple citations for minor infractions, like leaving her garbage bins out a few extra minutes after a grueling night shift. Mark, a local firefighter, had been repeatedly fined for the presence of his child's basketball hoop, a hoop that had hung there undisturbed for years. Even an elderly couple found themselves on the wrong side of Karen's arbitrary rules for simply having rose bushes that grew naturally. Brock, ever vigilant in his 25 years of service, began to notice a disturbing pattern. It wasn't merely about maintaining property values, it was about targeting those who worked long, hard hours. Sitting in his car one morning, he scrolled through the neighborhood Facebook group. Complaints about Karen were coming in fast and furious. Every story, every fine, added up to a clear picture of systematic harassment. Karen's rules were being weaponized against the community's first responders, nurses, doctors, and other essential workers who couldn't always be present to defend themselves. 2 days after the lime green violation notice, after a particularly brutal double shift handling a bank robbery downtown, Brock returned home to an even more shocking scene. 2 black SUVs, emblazoned with HOA security in bold letters, were parked directly in front of his driveway, completely blocking his access. Through his windshield, he watched as Karen Mitchell, dressed immaculately in her designer suit and armed with her tablet, strutted across his front lawn, snapping photos of every detail: his garden hose, his welcome mat, even the slightest imperfection. Each flash of her camera made his blood boil, yet he maintained his composure, knowing that 20 years on the force had taught him the value of restraint. "Excuse me," he called out, stepping from his car. "You're blocking my driveway, I need to get to my garage." Karen spun around, her blonde hair flowing perfectly as though styled by a professional. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Johnson, our neighborhood's most persistent rule breaker," she retorted with a sly smirk, tapping her tablet with long, neatly painted red nails. "Let's see: unpaid fine for lawn height violations, unapproved garden gnome placement, and now, non-regulation mailbox color." Brock couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity. Non-regulation mailbox color. "My mailbox has been white for 15 years, he explained. "According to our new guidelines, all mailboxes must be painted pristine pearl white from the Anderson Paint Company collection. Mine is classic white, a completely different shade." For a brief moment, Karen's confident smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. Brock pulled out his phone and began recording. "I understand you're new to the neighborhood," he said in a measured tone, "but these security vehicles are parked illegally. They're blocking access to my property, which violates City Ordinance 20 ICE 345. Karen's smile flickered, then she shot back, "I have full authority as an HOA board member to enforce our community standards," as she gestured toward 2 men in ill-fitting uniforms leaning against their SUVs. Yet, even as she spoke, Brock's experienced eyes caught something amiss about their badges. They looked like police badges, almost but not quite. In his long career, he knew every licensed security company in the jurisdiction, and Mitchell Security Solutions was nowhere to be found. Taking a deep breath, Brock tried to reason once more. "Look, I get that you're trying to maintain property values, but blocking someone's driveway over a $79 fine isn't just unreasonable, it's illegal. I'd hate to have to escalate this further." Karen's face turned as red as her polished nails. "Is that a threat, Mr. Johnson? Because I have photos documenting every violation on your property, and the HOA board will be very interested in your aggressive attitude," she snapped. Then she turned to the security guards and ordered, "Make a note of his threatening behavior," as they fumbled with their notepads. Brock noticed their shoulder patches were peeling off, looking cheap and substandard. His instincts screamed that something was deeply wrong. Quickly, he pulled up the city's business license database on his phone. Within minutes, his suspicions were confirmed. No licensed security company was registered under Karen's name or her brother's, whose uniform he had seen at the last HOA meeting. Just then, Mrs. Garcia from next door burst out in her nurse's scrubs. "Chief Johnson, I'm so glad you're here. They've been blocking my driveway too, and I'm late for my hospital shift," she exclaimed. Karen's expression shifted slightly at the mention of chief, but instead of backing down, she lifted her chin higher. "Your title doesn't matter here, Chief Johnson. HOA rules apply to everyone equally," she declared. "I'm sorry," Brock replied coolly, "but I need to document a few more violations before processing the additional fines for your uncooperative behavior." With her clipboard held like a shield, Karen marched away, leaving Brock to piece together the larger picture. Over the next several days, the evidence of Karen's systematic harassment began to emerge in full. Brock discovered that Karen wasn't simply issuing fines for minor infractions, she was deliberately targeting the homes of those who served the community. Sarah Thompson, the dedicated nurse, wasn't the only victim. Mark, a local firefighter, had been fined repeatedly for his child's basketball hoop, despite it having hung undisturbed for years. An elderly couple was cited for their unapproved rose bushes, and even a local teacher had been penalized for parking his car in his own driveway, because it was deemed unsightly. Late one afternoon, a text from Tom, Brock's trusted deputy, confirmed the worst. "Chief, remember the flooding issue last spring? Karen's brother's company just won the contract for drainage repair, at 3 times the cost of other bids." Brock leaned back, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Karen's so-called rules were not about maintaining community aesthetics, they were a calculated power play designed to bully those who couldn't easily defend themselves. Determined to expose the corruption, Brock headed to the county clerk's office. With the assistance of Mrs. Rodriguez, a helpful clerk, he pulled HOA registration documents from the past 6 months. Flipping through the pages, he uncovered a glaring omission. Karen had never disclosed her family connection to the security company during the bidding process, a clear conflict of interest. Then he discovered an even greater violation. Karen's home business registration revealed that she had been running a daycare center out of her garage, caring for up to 6 children at a time. This was strictly prohibited by HOA rules, yet it was the very same standard she used to fine neighbors for having home offices. Moreover, she did not have proper childcare licensing from the state. As if that were not enough, Mark the firefighter sent photos showing Karen's security company vehicles parked in fire lanes around the neighborhood. Blocking emergency access was not only a violation of city ordinances, but a potential danger to lives. Brock spent the remainder of the afternoon assembling his evidence. Property maps showed that Karen had extended her back fence 2 feet beyond her property line. Security camera footage from his cruiser documented instances where her company blocked emergency vehicle access, and the HOA's financial records revealed that she had been pushing the board to increase fines while funneling all security contracts to her brother's unlicensed company. Every piece of evidence painted a damning picture of systematic abuse of power. Brock meticulously copied every document, storing them in both digital and hard copy formats. Years on the force had taught him that thorough documentation was essential. Just as he was finalizing his case, Officer Rodriguez rushed into his office with urgent news. "Chief, you won't believe this. Karen's security company just tried to boot Dr. Prickson. Karen's company just tried to boot Dr. Thompson's car from the emergency room entrance. He was rushing in for critical surgery." Though anger surged within him, Brock remained composed. This was the final piece he needed. That evening, while reviewing his evidence, his phone lit up with a message. Karen had submitted a proposal for expanded security measures, and an emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the next night. A smile crept onto his face. The perfect moment had arrived. Sometimes, the best investigations are those where the target walks right into the trap they set for others. At the emergency meeting, the room was packed with frustrated and anxious residents. In the stuffy community center, Karen stood at the front in her immaculate designer suit, tablet clutched in her hand like a scepter. She launched into a rehearsed speech about her new community safety program, discussing the need for additional security guards and cameras on every street, all to protect property values. Beneath her polished tone, however, lay the bitter discontent of residents, tired of her tyranny. After she finished her speech, Brock stood up. With the weight of his badge in his pocket, he walked calmly to the front of the room. "Before we vote on these new security measures, there's something everyone needs to know," he said in a measured tone. "I'm Chief Anderson, and I've been investigating several concerning issues in our community." Karen's eyes narrowed when she recognized him in uniform. Brock then presented a wall of evidence, photographs of an unlicensed daycare operation running out of her house. Copies of business registration documents showing that her brother owned Safe Shield Security, an unlicensed security company, and detailed property maps documenting her illegal extension of her fence. The projector displayed every piece of evidence in stark detail. The room erupted in murmurs and hushed conversations. "That's against both HOA rules and state regulations," Brock stated firmly. While you fine Sarah Thompson for trivial infractions, you're systematically targeting our first responders, our nurses, and our firefighters. People who work long, grueling hours and deserve our respect. One by one, residents began to share their stories. An elderly couple recounted how they'd been fined for their naturally grown rose bushes. A local teacher detailed how his citation for an unsightly car had disrupted his daily routine. The collective anger in the room reached a fever pitch. Mr. Jenkins, a longtime resident and senior board member, called for an emergency vote. Hands shot up across the room as the homeowners, united by their shared grievances, voted unanimously. Karen Mitchell was removed from the board and banned from serving in any capacity ever again. As Karen stormed out, her designer handbag swinging wildly, she paused and turned back with tears of rage in her eyes, shouting, "This isn't over." But the unified front of the community left no doubt that her reign was finished. A twist of unconventional justice, just when it seemed that justice had been served. Brock had one final unforgettable twist planned, a demonstration that would cement the lesson for everyone involved. In many neighborhoods, loyal dogs often serve as guardians of property. But Brock had something far more formidable at his disposal, his secret, legally maintained collection of exotic animals. Deep within the wooded area of his property, hidden behind a reinforced fence, lay a secure pond that housed two massive crocodiles, affectionately named Goliath and Viper. These crocodiles were no ordinary pets. They were impressive, fully legal creatures that had been meticulously cared for and kept in a controlled habitat. Normally they remained confined to the pond, far from the prying eyes of the neighborhood. But on this day, as the community celebrated the fall of an overreaching tyrant, Brock decided to make a final, resounding statement. During a community event held to commemorate the restoration of fairness in Willow Creek, as neighbors mingled and shared stories of newfound unity, Karen, despite her removal from the board, attempted one last act of authority. Clutching her tablet, she tried to document more violations. Sensing her approach, Brock calmly walked to the side of his property and activated a hidden switch. The heavy metal gate in the secluded area swung open, and out glided Goliath and Viper. Their scales shimmered in the fading light, and their cold, calculating eyes locked onto Karen with an intensity that froze her in place. Goliath, the larger of the two, positioned himself directly in front of the exit, while Viper moved steadily to flank her. The sight was surreal, a living reminder that when one oversteps boundaries, nature itself can deliver justice. Karen's once confident demeanor crumbled as she backed away, her face a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Get back," Brock's voice rang out, calm yet filled with authority. "This is my property, and if you ever try to intrude again, you'll face the consequences." For several long, agonizing moments, the only sounds were the slow, deliberate movements of the crocodiles and the collective hush of the gathered neighbors. Karen's desperate pleas filled the air as she cried, "Please get me out of here." Her voice trembled with genuine fear, and her confident mask was shattered. Aftermath and the transformation of the community. News of the confrontation spread quickly through Willow Creek, turning the tale of Karen Mitchell into local legend, a modern fable about entitlement and the inevitable consequences of abusing power. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about how the once imposing HOA enforcer had been humbled in a way that no one could have imagined. Headlines in local papers recounted the story with a mix of awe and satisfaction, and even residents in nearby communities took note of the dramatic turn of events. In the weeks that followed, the fallout for Karen was swift and far-reaching. The HOA board, now stripped of its overreaching authority, swiftly imposed fines for her unauthorized use of community power and suspended her privileges for an entire year. No pool access, no clubhouse reservations, nothing. Her reputation was ruined. Her husband, disillusioned by her actions, filed for divorce. When Karen attempted to join another HOA board in a neighboring town, her past misdeeds preceded her, and she was promptly rejected. But the impact went far beyond Karen's personal downfall. Brock's investigation and the dramatic presentation of evidence exposed a corrupt system that had long targeted the community's most vulnerable. The pattern of harassment was undeniable, and the residents, especially those who worked long, grueling hours as first responders, nurses, doctors and firefighters, found a renewed sense of unity and empowerment. Community meetings, once quiet gatherings dominated by fear of retribution, transformed into open forums where residents demanded transparency and fairness. The corrupt practices of the old HOA were dismantled piece by piece. New policies were implemented to ensure that fines were levied only for genuine violations, and that every resident's rights were respected. The Citizens Oversight Committee, formed in the wake of these revelations, worked closely with local government to re-examine and reform outdated rules. One memorable afternoon, as Brock watered his meticulously maintained lawn, measured exactly at 3.5 inches tall, a young neighbor approached him with a handmade card. The crayon drawing depicted Brock in his police uniform, standing proudly in front of a house, bursting with color and life. The simple message read, "Thank you for making our neighborhood happy again." That card now hung on his desk at the station, a daily reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can spark monumental change. For Brock, the experience was more than a personal victory. It reaffirmed a timeless truth: true power is not about imposing arbitrary rules, it is about respecting each individual's right to live and work in peace. His garage, his lawn, and every inch of his property remained his, a testament to generations of hard work, maintained through a steadfast commitment to fairness. And if anyone ever tried to infringe upon that space again, they would have to answer to him. For Karen, the ordeal was a harsh lesson in humility, a lesson that she learned the hard way, while trapped in a locked garage, forced to endure days of isolation, hunger, and overwhelming embarrassment. Her desperate texts, recorded by security cameras and later shown to the entire community, became irrefutable evidence that no one is above the law. The memory of her downfall would haunt her for years, serving as a reminder that entitlement comes with a price. A legacy of justice. In the months that followed, Willow Creek underwent a remarkable transformation. The oppressive atmosphere created by the old HOA gave way to a renewed spirit of cooperation and community. Neighbors who had once lived in fear of arbitrary fines began to speak out. Stories emerged of first responders, nurses, teachers, and other hard-working residents who had been unfairly targeted and who now found themselves vindicated. The incident sparked a larger conversation about the abuse of power, and eventually, the HOA was restructured to ensure that its rules were applied fairly and transparently. At community gatherings, residents celebrated their newfound unity. Block parties replaced tense neighborhood meetings, and children played freely in yards that were no longer battlegrounds of petty citations. The story of Karen's downfall, embellished by the unforgettable appearance of Goliath and Viper, became a symbol of hope and a cautionary tale for future generations. It was said that when you try to take what isn't yours, sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. Brock continued his work as chief of police, with the same quiet determination that had always defined him. Every time he pulled into his driveway, he did so with the assurance that his space was secure and his boundaries respected. His property remained his sanctuary, a place where every tool was in its proper place, every corner was familiar, and no one could intrude without facing the consequences. As for Karen, her once imposing reign came crashing down. Her reputation was in tatters, her personal life ruined, and her career evaporated in the public eye. In a final twist of poetic justice, she was forced to watch as the community she had so ruthlessly bullied reclaimed its dignity. Her story became a legend, a warning to anyone who dared to abuse power for personal gain. Reflections on community and power. Standing on his porch one cool evening, Brock gazed out over his property. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the perfectly maintained lawn and the sturdy walls of his garage. In that quiet moment, he reflected on everything that had transpired. The day a petty HOA fine sparked a chain reaction that exposed corruption, dismantled a tyrannical system, and united a community. He remembered the green violation notice, the harsh words exchanged with Karen, the mounting evidence of abuse, and finally, the dramatic showdown that left Karen humbled and the community empowered. For Brock, the experience was a profound reminder that true power lies not in enforcing arbitrary rules, but in upholding justice and protecting the rights of every individual. The battle for personal space was about much more than a finely mowed lawn or a set of garden gnomes. It was about the dignity of the community's hard-working first responders and essential workers, and about ensuring that every resident was treated with respect. In the end, the legacy of that turbulent period in Willow Creek became a beacon for change. Neighbors who had once been divided by petty disputes now stood together, united by the shared belief that no one should ever be bullied or intimidated by those in power. And while Karen's story was one of downfall and disgrace, it also served as a reminder that when the community unites, even the most entrenched tyranny can be overcome. Brock's journey taught him that defending one's own space was not an act of selfishness, but a necessary stand for justice. His garage, his lawn, and every inch of his property were symbols of a legacy built on hard work, perseverance, and an unyielding commitment to fairness. And as the neighborhood moved forward, the story of how a petty fine and unchecked arrogance were met with resolute defiance and unconventional justice continued to inspire and unite the residents of Willow Creek. If you've ever had to stand up for what's yours, if you believe that no one should be allowed to bully others into submission, then this story is for you. It's a testament to the power of unity, the importance of respecting personal boundaries, and the truth that sometimes, when the hunter becomes the hunted, justice prevails. Remember, when you try to take what isn't yours, the consequences may be far greater than you ever imagined. And in a community where every individual's rights are respected, true peace and prosperity can finally be achieved. Everybody please subscribe for more stories. Subscribe.